All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Today, I have with me Kate Hamilton. Kate has basically been in marketing leadership in multiple agencies before, and she's a fractional CMO today for agencies. Thanks for coming on the show, Kate.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really excited to have the conversation here.
Yeah, me too. Well, I mean, we've talked before and geeked out about a lot of the same stuff. You've seen things from both kind of the sales and marketing side of things, but like internally. And when we talked before, you had kind of commented that a lot of times there's siloing that happens. Um, I guess why do you think that happens? And yeah, and just in your experience.
Yeah, I think silos happen partly because of the way an organization starts to evolve and develop over time. So the org design in itself is adding on functions or adding on different departments and teams, and each has its own set of metrics or KPIs. And over time, there's a lack of shared incentives, lack of shared context that starts to create some friction. It can manifest sometimes even in like turf wars almost because everybody's got their piece of the pie. In solely marketing agencies, what I've seen is you've got your SEO team, you've got your content team, you've got your development team. Each team member is specialized in that area, but then they also don't have enough generalists to walk between the teams and create synergies and alignment and have everybody rowing in the same boat. So it's not, I think, it's not maliciously driven. It's just out of this expertise or specialty department kind of ownership, and then folks not being able to understand the other side. And it can really create tensions with internally, but I think also if we think about agencies at the end of the day, we're delivering to clients, that tension can manifest in the work too.
Mm,
And that can be interpreted by a client and feel frustrating, or it often from a client perspective can also result in bloat, because now you've got all this project management overhead trying to talk to people. And again, it's not anybody internally intentionally trying to create that silo. It just kind of naturally evolves, and if you don't know about it, you're and recognize that it's going to happen, you can't get ahead of it and create, break down those walls a little bit.
yeah. Well, when you think about breaking down the walls, is it like is it changing the KPIs, and maybe sharing some KPIs that to like create more alignment, or what have you seen be important in helping to break those silos down?
Yeah, shared KPIs is one way for you to break that down. But that shared KPI, you still need to maybe translate it to the smaller KPIs or metrics that then each department is contributing to. So if you uh, have ever adopted OKRs, that actually can be an interesting structure to create shared alignment. So if the bigger OKR is the team wide KPI, and then the other metrics are supporting in that, I think is a way to start to break down those silos. SEO knows its part to which it can play, but then what is that impact in the larger context and scope? Sometimes SEO teams wouldn't know or won't be able to figure that out. Likewise for social, they play a certain part that contributes to a larger program deliverable. But I think if you don't figure that out and you can't ladder that up, folks are just working in their little realm. And they won't be able to see the bigger picture if they haven't been in those more generalist marketing roles or strategic leadership. So
Yeah.
this is kind of thinking about, in some ways, some team dynamics as well on top of objectives and goal achievement.
Yeah, it does seem like goals are so important. Like people can talk about, oh, well, I'm going to produce this piece of content, and it's like, well, what is the purpose of that piece of content? If you don't know exactly, like, is this supposed to bring in leads? Is it supposed to generate awareness? Is it supposed to just create engagement? Like there's so many different things like that. I think kind of the discussion around KPIs maybe overlaps with that. Is if you don't have those, um, if they're not aligned well, you're going to probably make those silos worse over time.
Yeah, and shared context or shared understanding of what that means as well. So, how many of us as leaders have set out to your point, develop a piece of content or host an event, and other leadership or even our bosses think it's going to do one thing, and it actually intentionally was meant to do something else. And that can also create not only misalignment, but it almost cements sometimes that siloing that can happen in
Mhm.
organizations. You know, from a content perspective, I know that one piece of content isn't going to be the golden arrow. It's truly an ecosystem, and our job as marketers is to acknowledge that that one piece of content should be part of a content sort of like pillar and an engagement strategy beyond just its one function. But a lot of leaders outside of marketing, and even our clients have this challenge too. They see how much time you spend. Let's say this is a white paper, so you're spending a lot more time and investment in creating it, researching it, and then getting it all polished and out there. And then they're like, well, I'll
How many
wait.
leads?
I'll wait for my leads,
Yeah.
and can that happen? 100%. Should that be an expectation? 100%. But is that just going to happen magically? No. That this is where I think, and content being really tactical, sometimes it's easier for people to wrap their heads around it, but it manifests
Mhm.
in other places like events. People think, because events are expensive too, time,
Yeah.
resources, and money, and people think that that is also going to knock it out of the park. And I think, when we're talking about these micro pieces, again, it's somewhat representative of the silos that can happen even within an agency's walls. It's not seeing the larger, bigger picture of the interplay. It's almost ignoring that what we're doing, no matter what we're trying to sell, is create experiences that engage audiences.
Yeah.
You just swap out
Overall.
words, right?
Yep. Well, I think that's actually a good segue to my next question, which, like, we had talked about how you're more of a strategist at heart, and I know, sometimes senior leadership, uh, or just in general in our world, people can resort to tactics pretty quickly. It's like, oh, I saw that competitor was doing this, or I read a social post that we should be doing this tactic. Um, how do you feel like, maybe why do you think teams skip straight to tactics? And why do you think, like, I guess, where do you see the role of strategy? And yeah.
Yeah. The skip past strategy into tactics, I feel like, is often a reticence to commit to some pretty important tenets that would drive strategy and that will take time to build. So that's one thing. I see like a little bit of reticence, maybe a little bit of fear. And then there's also just some lack of understanding of why strategy is so important. Um, they think, oh, we can do the tactic and it's going to fit perfectly well. The longer you're in marketing, the more you can see, yeah, we can do those tactics, but you're going to start chasing your tail sometimes. You don't necessarily know, is that tactic absolutely the priority in that moment. And then what happens is a very reactionary cycle starts to occur.
Mhm.
And so, talk about rabbit holes, right? Like you're just like starting to just run a little ragged when you have invested in building a strategy, whether the strategy is right or wrong. What then happens is every tactical decision, every content theme decision can come back to a source of truth. And you can get consistency not only in the execution of the work, but you can then get reliable consistency in the data of the performance of the program. And I think people forget that because, yeah, we can tactically just run marketing. And yes, we're going to get a ton of performance data. Hello, big data. Here we are.
Yeah.
But can we truly interpret the data? Like, how many of us have also had a client be like, "Well, here's my past performance of my website," but they redesigned the website. and they want to completely rely still on that performance data. But in some ways, once you've redesigned or you've changed, significantly what you're doing, the past performance data, it's like squinting at it to trust it because it's
Hmm.
in a totally different environment and world. So I
Yeah.
think,
Well, I mean,
go ahead. Yeah.
sorry. I was just going to say the thing that made me think about is, at least in the world that I was in, um, like traffic was a big metric when it came to content. So it's like, oh, let's get the most traffic. But then over time, you realize, well, not all the content that you're producing actually leads to new business. Like you might have, it's like, oh yeah, we optimized for this keyword, but that's attracting actually the wrong people to the site. And if we lost that traffic tomorrow, it would not affect the amount of leads that are coming in our front door. But if you are so married to like, but our traffic goes up here, like you could end up making some really poor decisions as a result.
Yeah. The vanity metrics become
Hmm.
in incredibly frustrating for everybody involved, especially if you're working with clients or leadership or decision makers who are still kind of holding on to those vanity metrics for whatever the reasons are. Um, but it can, again, without a strategy in place, and again, it doesn't have to be that complex, although often there's enough components in it that make it feel like a big beefy thing. But
Hmm.
exactly the example that you gave is, well, we're getting this amount of traffic, but it's not the right buyers. Well, then why are we wasting our time? You know,
Yeah.
it's like email lists. A lot of folks, I think, are further along in accepting this, but you kind of want people who aren't engaging in your newsletter to unsubscribe. You want to make them do that because they're ruining your metrics. They're 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 almost making it difficult to recognize, is this a successful newsletter or not if half of them aren't opening it.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting, I don't know, trust fall in investing in a strategy. But what I find is it then allows you to make those smart contextual, decisions and interpretations of what to do next instead of spaghetti against the wall, which when you're doing tactical execution, that's essentially what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, a lot, part of me wonders if I know, a lot of founders, CEOs, when they're starting their agencies, it is oftentimes a um, ready, fire, aim sort of approach.
Hmm.
And I think maybe as your agency grows and you're trying to be more deliberate with, putting things in place to make it scale, you have to introduce that aim part a little bit more rather than continuing in that sort of move first, ask questions later sort of approach. Have you seen that?
I have seen that. And what I have found can bridge that gap or, start to create structure and scale is adopting a little bit of a test and learn in an almost sprint mentality that
Hmm.
can still feel like we're quickly moving, we're quickly making decisions, kind of pay homage to the early days of agency startup building life, but start to then develop a bit more of an intentional mindset on what are we doing and how is it helping us move forward. And that doesn't, strategies can be big and small, right? So, maybe you just start with one goal and one campaign, like start small. And once you prove that that works, you can then, add on and do more.
Hmm.
That tends to be a little bit more palatable for those startup leaders and agency leaders as well. They are trying to build quickly, and that investment can feel like it's holding them back or delaying them, but just incremental test and learn, that works really, really well. Um, and
Yeah.
allows you to like almost build the strategy as you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, you also get the data that you can point to. So if you're steering
Right.
those sprints, you can say, hey, look, we have some early feedback on this, and oh, it was a dud. Okay, well, now we can switch gears, or oh, this was really successful. Now we can double down. But it's like there's these very clear, a very clear cadence to when we should kind of shift directions if necessary. I mean, it's kind of like if you're going on a hike, like there's the let's just start walking, or let's look at the map, in depth before we start walking. And maybe, I think the answer is probably a little bit in both directions. But I think that sprint approach, it's kind of like stopping every once in a while, looking back at the map, making sure we're on track, and course correcting if need be, so that you ultimately get to the destination you're hoping to get to.
Right. It's like adopting A/B testing in paid media,
Hmm.
or at least, from my background, it was more social paid media, but you don't run those ads for long. You want to collect as much quick data as you can and incrementally shift it as you go. So, maybe it's let's test the creative. Then, a week later you're testing the tagline, and the week later you're testing something else, and you can kind of adopt that level on in all mediums of marketing. It doesn't have to be paid, but that can be really helpful and a far more approachable program or way of thinking about marketing for agencies, or even clients too, right? These are it's a little bit more around the maturity of the organization and where it's at from a sophisticated marketing function kind of perspective. I think even if you do have structure, thinking about that is sometimes really helpful to get you out of a rut with your strategy too. And
Yeah.
it's kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know you've built sales and marketing functions from scratch. Um, and I'm a big proponent on having a clear focus. I think we've talked about this some before, but maybe what tends to go wrong from your perspective if you don't have that clear focus when building your sales and marketing functions?
Yeah. Um, you're going to do it twice, thrice, four times over sometimes without really knowing the North Star. And what I mean by North Star is directionally where the organization or client program, again, interchangeable words here, where it's headed. We don't need to know, like, we're on a road trip, right? We don't need to know where we're going to stop every single stop, but we have to have a general direction that we have in mind. We're going to go west. Okay. Or we're going to end in San Francisco. What we need to generally have that direction, because when we don't, marketing and sales functions are going to really struggle. Both need
Mm.
some general idea so that they can build the tent poles that's needed. In marketing, that tends to be, content themes, a general understanding of who you're targeting, some idea of the tactics you're going to use that work within that structure.
Hmm.
Sales needs that too, especially the more consultative selling that you're taking on. A lot of agencies are selling themselves, selling their people, selling IP. That requires trust building. It requires some differentiation, among the noise. If you're a boutique agency in your industry, there's probably 10 other boutique agencies you can throw a rock at. And so what sales needs are those talking points that really resonate and break through the noise. And every time you pivot, new audience target, new industry, new service to sell, you have to restart all over again almost. And
Yeah.
that can be really, really frustrating, and add in, the scarier part of how long your sales, cycle is. Let's say again, consultative sales can take a couple of months to close a deal. That it's like a lead loss or loss leader here that you're just not ever going to get that time back.
Yeah.
It's not impossible to pivot. I'm not against pivoting. I actually love testing and learning and being pragmatic. And I encourage my teams to think that way, because once we get stuck in a rut, it's like the death of a marketing program. But
Hmm.
again, like, we need to intentionally know kind of where we're headed. So those longer, harder to build and get going kind of pieces, we can lay the tracks, and then they'll start to pay off in the end. And I don't know if every leader or decision maker can wrap their mind around that sometimes.
Yeah.
But the more that you can, again, we want to get here. Okay, great. How we get there may not matter, but we need to get here. That gives a lot of ability for a marketing and sales function to start actually scaling.
Yeah. Do you think this is me just kind of reflecting on my own uh, work history? Do you feel like you can put a dollar amount as the goal, or you can put like a more of a mission oriented goal, like we want to transform this many companies or something like that? Do you feel like, I mean, I don't know, in my experience, I think that maybe for the CEO or something like that, the former might matter more, just because they're looking at the numbers, not necessarily they're like greedy, but it's just like, to keep this whole thing going, we have to, um, we have to pay attention to the bottom line. But from a team standpoint, having kind of like, I don't know, a little more of a like, why am I doing this sort of work? Like giving them a little bit more purpose behind it.
Yeah, the numbers, unless you're in a sales driven organization, which they exist, they can be successful. If it's just a solid number, you're going to really struggle keeping people engaged, motivated, and inspired. And that's not because they don't also care about money. People are pretty easy to put those two things together. Uh,
Hmm.
but in times of scarcity, in times of difficult markets, in times of recession, depressions, uh,
Hmm.
just that solid number isn't always enough to get people energized, because it's not just what they're doing that ends up, you know, contributing to the goal. If you've
Yeah.
got other outside factors, like how do you then continue to keep people like engaged and recognizing, hey, that's not, you're doing all you can. You're doing what you need to be doing. We're just in a moment of pause. How do you keep them
Yeah.
engaged? And I think the other thing that I've been kind of talking about this to a couple of other people, but more and more what we're seeing with younger generations is more values aligned decision making and buying, and they want to see values in their employer. That's how they're feeling connected. And I think if we ignore some of that, we're going to really disconnect from great talent coming up, because that's how they're being, really engaging, and how their expectation is through that kind of engagement. So
Yeah.
I get why CEOs want to target the number, and we all should have a number, right? Like businesses are in the business for business, right? That's why we're doing it. But if you can add on values, goals, I think it can be helpful in a number of ways.
Yeah. It just gives more, honestly, it kind of humanizes it, and um, I think maybe appeals to some of the there's the other kind of parts of the hierarchy of needs, like
Mhm.
money is kind of that, maybe that base level, but if you can speak to some of those other elements of the hierarchy of needs, that's important too.
Yeah, long ago, I listened to it was like a TED style talk, but animated. But there was a quote in it, was like, if you can pay people enough where they can handle their bills, and they're no longer worried, you can then get so much more work out of them through inspiring them and connecting with them at their values. And that stuck with me a long time, because the example that they tied it to was how many people have contributed to Wikipedia and building something, and they do it in their free time. If
Mm.
you can think about that, like in professional world, if you can combine you paying people enough to satisfy their needs, and then giving them some reasons to believe you can get such a better work product from anybody, because they're then engaged at different levels.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. um well, other thing I wanted to talk about, I know you've probably seen this, but if there's like misalignment at the top of a company, um or they're just having a hard time um, making tough calls, maybe around focusing, that sort of thing. Like, what are like some signs that maybe indicate that there's that misalignment, and what sort of side effects do you feel like that uh, creates within an agency?
Yeah. And one of the clear signs is when your people start asking, why are we making these decisions?
Hmm.
And it seems really judgy to say that, but it's important to call it out, because if people can't obviously see the why, then two things could be happening. Maybe the decisions don't make sense with, what has been communicated to them, and there could be reasons why those decisions had to get made the way that they were, but you might not be communicating to them as well. And what will happen is breaking down of trust, whether you intended it or not. Like, people just want to know, what are we doing and why are making these decisions. And if they can't get the answers, they'll start to really question leadership and not have the trust. And then they get unfocused. They sort of lose their ability to make decisions. In agencies, every single person who works in an agency is having to constantly prioritize where they spend their time, right? Like, if they're billable, they're doing that with client work. If they're maybe non-billable or more of a manager, so they're split, they're having to weigh those decisions every day. When you start to get into that culture of, maybe people don't really understand what we're doing anymore, or what's our reason to be, they'll start to really struggle to make those decisions. When you have a North Star or a point of truth and everybody understands, like, this is what we're doing, that decision was made because of this, then
Hmm.
they'll also be able to stay true to, this is our goal. So today I need to spend all of my time billing, or I need to really work at building a bit more trust with this client, so that we can hopefully convince them to take on this next part of work that we see would be valuable for them, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I find that then in those environments, just people just lose their way. And there's just too many things going on in agencies that can distract people, um, that that will start to really create, I think, some challenges in productivity and I don't know, even internal sentiment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I can see where, I've talked about this before, but I think there's a natural gravitational pull when you're starting an agency to towards broadening rather than focusing.
Mm,
Because like, well, we'll serve whoever wants to, write us a check. If we can provide our service to whomever, we will, and that's great. And you might get referrals off of that and do good work and everything. But that doesn't differentiate you, and it doesn't allow you to deliberately scale. And I think also just internally, like if you're like, oh, well, I have to rapidly switch gears to help this client over here. Oh, and then I have to switch gears again to help this other client over here. Like if you can focus, you can create a little bit more of like, I don't know, like a flywheel of success. Cause it's like, oh, I learned this thing from this similar client over here that we can apply to this client over here. And oh, and then there's a learning from here that I can apply back over here, because they're at least all fairly similar. They're not so different from each other that there's no real kind of transferring of insights from client to client. So I could see, like, just from a I don't know, employee satisfaction standpoint, working with at least adjacent or similar clients or industries can be really helpful, not just from a marketing or sales side of things, but also from a delivery standpoint too.
yeah, it's probably one of the biggest challenges plaguing agencies across the board. How generalist or how niche do we want to go? And
Hmm.
and there's problems on both sides of that. The more generalist you get, the harder it is to stand out, because your messaging just in general becomes watered down. It's diluted. It can't
Hmm.
specifically target and talk to a pain point for that, sub segment of the audience. And that you can ride that for a long time. There's a lot of organizations that, they're more generalists. They're able to maybe they have a good service that generality can work. On the flip side, when you get really niche, and this is an interesting thought that I had when you were talking about talent, if you're so focused and so niche, if you don't find the right talent that's comfortable with kind of staying in the same sandbox, you also can alienate some of your all-star talent, those that kind of always want a new challenge, always want to go after that next new thing.
Hmm.
That's not a bad thing. There's, again, a lot of organizations that are super niche. We just do this for these types of organizations, and we're looking for this kind of talent. All this to say is I think you need to know that. This goes back to business strategy and decision making. Where do you wanna play and commit to that? And then those micro decisions will be a lot easier. The promises that you make to talent. You are just gonna work on this, fintech clients, and you're gonna be so immersed in financial services. Some people
Yeah.
will be like, "Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, I wanna do that." But you might not get those all-star sort of, what do they call them?
Unicorns
The
or something.
unicorns, yeah, because unicorns tend to want really novel, challenges coming at them kind of a lot. That they work really well in those more generalist agencies, and I've been a little bit more like that. I like new challenges. I like going in and out of different industries. That's not just in my agency world. I've quite literally jumped from industry to industry since I started working, from concrete construction to skincare to, working in social media. Like, I just
Yeah.
always bounced, and I really like that. That change is stimulating to me, and I, have been successful in bringing that forward when I'm working with clients. That works for me. That might not work for everybody else, though. I've got colleagues and peers who love financial services, and they just stay there, and that's awesome. But yeah, I think I'm probably going down a little bit of a rabbit hole myself, but I think you have to still choose
Yeah.
some direction. And then you can create the marketing behind it that supports it. Gonna stay generalist? Okay, then you just know you're gonna have to put a bit more work in segmenting your audiences and having these micro campaigns running.
Yeah. Well, I think too, just knowing that there's going to be a little bit more effort probably going into it as well. Like, I saw this when I was in house. Um, that when you were talking to three different audiences, if you wanted to like generate engagement, you had to have specific messaging, specific content for each of those. So it's three times the investment, three times the energy going into it, which is great if think, okay, well, we think we're going to get results in each of these three verticals. Um, but if you're like, oh, we have very little money, very little time, it's like, well, you might need to start narrow and then broaden out from
Right.
there, rather than you know going wide to start off with.
Yeah, and that's also a place of education for leadership too. This idea of the 3 times the work. It's not just 3 different audiences, and they probably all have 3 themes or talking points, but then you also have to create the content that drives them through a journey. And not that I love adopting the whole funnel idea, because that concept's dead. It's more like walking through a forest is how people engage with brands, right? Like,
Yeah.
it is not so linear. We want it to be as marketers, but it just isn't, right?
Yeah.
Then you have to think about, okay, you have these 3 audiences and maybe 3 talking points per, for wherever that audience is. Now you also have the funnel to work through. And so quite quickly, when you can't narrow in, you have this massive marketing program to support. And even if you're not spending money in paid, that is still a huge lift from organic perspective. And
Hmm.
and so I think that is, as marketing leaders, we need to be far more upfront with our bosses and making them understand what we're actually signing up for. And if that's the direction the business wants to take, that's fine. But then we need to then set these expectations, to your point, like maybe we start small. Today's, focus is going to be this core audience that we know we can rely on. And then tomorrow we'll work on this other, thing. And this is going to take a year maybe, to finally fully put together a program that addresses all three audiences. You got to
Yeah.
set that expectation early, or else you do run into these, uncomfortable conversations, as we all have, is like, why is the marketing not working? And it's like, well, we're trying to talk to like so many different people right now,
Yeah.
and I've got one content marketer and maybe a, social media strategist and someone in SEO, and we're working our as fast as we can, and I
Yeah.
think that expectation, and again, to go back to OKRs and shared KPIs, that can be really helpful to set the right expectations.
Yep. No, that's true. I feel like setting expectations is kind of the theme, and I think that's huge. Because it's going to shift based off of the strategy. So, and both directions too. Like, marketing talking to the leadership and being like, hey, if this is the direction we want to go, um, this is what the timeline we're looking at. But if you have a specific timeline, well, then I need to reset expectations
Right.
about how we need to approach this, what strategy we're going to take. We're going to, start small and then expand rather than go for, this broader audience up front, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And do it, assume people don't understand marketing as much as you might think. We all, as marketers, we know how immersed we are, and we recognize that not everyone understands marketing. I would encourage even bringing the bar even lower, just to ensure that that alignment is truly happening
Hmm.
across the right people. And that's not to say that, everyone has a very, novice understanding of marketing, but again, it goes to how, when you're scrappy or you're small, every resource counts, every moment counts. So the more you can really ensure that there's alignment and understanding of what marketing can do, I think you save yourself some headaches later.
Yeah. You don't want to have that like conversation after the fact, being like, why didn't this get done? And it's like, well, we didn't have enough resources because you wanted us to do this. But that's unrealistic. It's like, well, you should have told me it was unrealistic up front.
Right. And these are unfortunately some uncomfortable conversations to be having. Nobody wants to say, "Hey, we're limited or we don't have enough resources." But I think we just have to start doing it more and more aggressively, especially as marketing gets bigger and bigger in some ways. These digital tools, AI is making, it in theory easier. In practice, it's 50-50, to do all this work. And so there's an expectation you can do it faster, smarter, quicker, and all those things. Um, and that's not necessarily true. Um, and I think we're just taking on more as marketers. So again, alignment expectations, saying, hey, actually, if this is our focus, we're going to put pause over here on this
Hmm.
program that we were driving, but we want to, we're here for to meet the business. So we're going to recommend that we just focus where we need to focus. Those kinds of conversations are hard, but need to be happening more.
Yeah. Just facing some of those things head on and making sure that everyone's on the same page. Um, well, I wanted to switch gears a little bit. I know that a lot of agencies, um, they might grow from referrals for a good, portion of at least of their early growth. But a lot of times they can hit a ceiling, maybe where those referrals aren't coming in or they're not coming in as fast as they used to, that sort of thing. In your experience, as a fractional CMO, as being in house, what do you feel like it takes to build a more intentional agency growth engine?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've observed in that context where people are really able to rely on referral, they sort of throw everything else out, and by the time they realize that the referrals are maybe slowing down, it's a little too late. So the first thing I think people just, if you're running a business, pick 1 to 2 evergreen tactics and just have it kind of running in the background, so that, again, when something should change, you're not relying on one source for your growth. Um,
Mhm.
you can swap out referrals with whatever else, right? Like any if you're relying on one single source, you're probably going to create yourself a problem at some point. Even if you're successful, when you want to scale or grow quite quickly, and have a growth goal, you're still starting from scratch. So it doesn't really matter if it's like a point of pain or, opportunity.
Yeah.
Um, so that's just one thing. And the other thing, for what will be helpful in scaling and growing, it's looking at the whole funnel and finding at least one small tactic to influence each point along that journey, so that you're basically covering the landscape. And so what I find that that will do is it will pull all these different marketing tactics forward and into your program,
Mm.
but not require you to do it across everything. So, brand awareness. Well, we're going to start doing a little bit of content marketing at a high level. Okay, so that's going to take care of that. We need to make sure we're nurturing. So, we're going to create a series where we invite our buyers to have conversations with us. Okay, that's like in the middle, right? Like you kind of need to find different ways to cover it, but be pragmatic for the, again, resources and what you have available to use. But I think that
Yeah.
that will help you start to scale incrementally, and start to cover yourself.
Yeah. So that when referrals do slow down, or there's still light, 1 month or something like that, you have people you've been nurturing, and they're more likely to be warm when you need them to be warm.
Right. And that, in again, in some ways you're going to be taking advantage of all of the channels probably in our marketing toolboxes. Just it doesn't mean that you're doing it in every single thing. Everything has a place or a role. So that's how I like to think about marketing: is how do we turn on each one of those little elements, but have some area of focus. Email's great for nurturing, and it serves as a great tool for ABM style marketing. Um, but you can't do email necessarily across the whole funnel and do it well if you've got a team of 2.
Yeah.
You just spend all your time in email land and not do anything else. So
Yeah.
this is where, like, the matchmaking of marketing tactic and some point in the funnel that is helping along the way, I think is a successful approach to starting to scale. And then you'll expand, these programs that are so comprehensive, where email is actually across the whole funnel. You've got event programming that's along all of the journey, from buyers that don't know you all the way to customer engagement programs. Then you can really expand. But most of us aren't at that place. So it's kind of thinking about it that way that I think can make it easier and more approachable.
Yeah. Almost like, I've heard people say, like, uh, one, what is it? One offer, one channel. Um, I forget what the other one was, but essentially you're starting out with just kind of like doing one thing well throughout the funnel, uh, and then it's like, okay, we figured out what's working well, what messaging's working, what offers working, all that, and then we can expand out from there. But like a lot of times, people will be like, well, we have to post on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, like, this is like we have to be present everywhere. And it's like, well, you're a 5-person team. Like, maybe we don't over
Yeah.
index on these things where nobody's actually paying attention, and we just focus on one where we know most of our audience is. And down
Right.
the road, when we're larger and we can add to our team, then we can explore additional channels. But kind of being realistic, setting the right expectations uh, based off of what stage of agency growth you're at.
Yeah, that FOMO trap is a bad one to fall into.
Yeah.
And, you know, I in my recruitment marketing days, like when Snapchat was just coming out, I can't tell you how many clients were like, "We have to be on Snapchat." And my question was, is your talent there? You know, it is are they expecting to engage with a potential employer on Snapchat? You know, so it's a very niche and granular example, but it's something that could be helpful for people to run that scenario through in their head too. You know, Twitter, I wish that we could still be successful on Twitter as marketers, but it's long been a platform that's very difficult to manage and see KPI success, just for the average. So unless you really can see the engagement, it's totally fine if you're not there because you're
Mhm.
resource, you know, restrained. And I think just being smart again, like matching what you need to be doing with the right channel or the right medium of marketing can be a good way to think about it. So you're not just taking it on because, well, ABC agency is
Yeah.
doing a bunch on Facebook, and there may be reasons, right? That's the other thing that I have, found is helpful in talking with clients. We don't know what their strategy is, we know what our strategy is, and our
Mhm.
strategy needs to do these things, and that's why we're recommending these tactics or these channels, and that can help people back off a little bit that FOMO
Yeah.
clip, you know?
No, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I was working in a e-commerce conversion optimization agency, we'd have clients regularly be like, can you help us make our site like Nike? And it's like they're probably making almost a pure brand play with their website,
Right,
and so if you try to adjust your website to reflect what they're doing, and you're $1 million fairly small e-com shop, like you're going to make some really bad decisions because that's just not where you're at, and your goals are different. And so just blindly copying the competition um, can end up leading to some very disastrous uh, results for your company.
that, yeah, but on the flip side, you know, there is, something to be said to be inspired by some of these big brands that are doing some really creative and interesting things, like, a lot of people don't realize that the, Nike Run Club app has, since its beginning, never been a commerce-driven, program. They never wanted it to be about selling shoes.
Hmm.
Uh, and I can say that because was at an event long, long ago where one of the stakeholders in that app was talking about it. He's like, people have asked us, you know, why aren't you integrating, you know, shoe ads and things like that? And that's not the agenda. That's not the objective for that particular app. What they're trying to do is in really engage an audience wanting to have fitness as a core element of their life. And they're banking on that you're going to buy a pair of Nike shoes at some point, right?
Yeah. I
But they're trying
mean,
to
it's
create
content marketing on some level, right?
100%. Like
Yeah.
it's a fat because they've, I don't know if you've familiar. It's my preferred running app, but they've also added other you know, areas of fitness, including like yoga and like other,
Hmm.
you know, cool things. And they have another sister app called the Nike Training Club app. And both again aren't about selling shoes. That's interesting to observe because what we can look at then for a smaller agency is there something that would be unique and break down the barriers or differentiate us? You know, maybe you've tried content marketing and for whatever reason, it just doesn't work. You know, think about blue collar audiences. How often are they in front of a computer or in front of their phone or in front of like a magazine? What could you do then to break through the noise? Is there something else that you can create that's content but not traditional content, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and those are things that are cool. And so I bring that up because it's like I don't want to discourage clients or agencies to get a, you know, see something really cool out there, but you still need to come back and apply, you know, some strategic decision making and thinking to it and figure out what that could look like and how that could fit for what you're trying to accomplish. So you're not throwing your very essential website conversion, you know, mechanism out the door for, you
Yeah.
know, a cool brand site. You're
Yeah.
finding something else that, you know, could work for you. That's the same idea.
Yeah. Almost like reverse engineer maybe why they did that, and then figure out what gems you can pull from that rather than just trying to copy something wholesale.
Right. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, also really making sure to keep the audience front and center. You know,
Yeah,
what do they
absolutely.
need? What do they care about? Because that's, I think, something else that a lot of brands are falling into this trap, agencies being a brand as well, is it's all about them. It's all about, us. And we
Yeah.
forget the other side. And in actuality, you actually have to flip that. Minimize you. It's all about them.
Yep.
That's how you'll get them to engage. That's how you get audiences to really resonate with what you're doing.
100%. Yep. Well, Kate, this has been super fun. I feel like we could probably keep on talking, but yeah, we're just going to run out of time, I think, before that happens. But yeah, for folks who want to connect with you, learn more about your background, what you're doing now, and maybe just kind of you continue this conversation, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, katemhamilton.com. So that's katemhamilton.com. There's quite a few of us Kate Hamiltons out there in the world. So helpful, one little letter there. Reaching out there or connecting on LinkedIn. Again, Kate M. Hamilton there too. I'm consistent and branded, if nothing else. And would love to have conversations like this with others. Always love conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm excited to stay in touch and see what you do next.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.